Welcome to another episode for this Exponential Next series on becoming a future-ready church. Many church leaders struggle with ministry paradigms that thrived in the past, but seem to no longer work or make sense to the rising generation. For example, when it came to family ministries, many churches used to focus solely on children's ministries, and more recently also turned to marriage and family life. But now they also need to direct their attention to single adults, single parents, childless couples, couples with adopted children, and people in other circumstances. In this episode, we will discuss the shift from nuclear families to forged families, why churches need to serve a wider range of households. How can churches, family ministries build increased capacity in people so that they can be more available to those in their community who are lonely, struggling, or feeling that they don't fit in? My name is Adelle Banks, and I'm pleased to host this episode. I am a veteran religion journalist and work as the project's editor and a national reporter at Religion News Service. My co-authors, Daniel Yang and Warren Bird, and I have written a book together, published by Zondervan, Becoming a Future-Ready Church, 8 Shifts to Encourage and Empower the Next Generation of Leaders. I'm happy to welcome my guest, the Reverend Carl Johnson, lead pastor of Faith City Church in St. Paul, Minnesota. Carl is the co-founder of his church and a person known for his work to distribute hot meals to hundreds of families in his state. A former grocery store employee, his ministry in St. Paul now includes Storehouse Grocers, a grocery store that serves his neighborhood. Thanks for joining me on this episode, Carl.
Oh, I'm so welcome. Thank you.
When my co-authors and I wrote about the shifts in congregations related to ministries to families, we noted how pop culture has long reflected various kinds of families. They've ranged from traditional husband, wife, kids, or of Leave It to Beaver, starting in the 1950s, to a starring role of a widower in The Andy Griffith Show in the 1960s and Full House in the 1980s and 90s. And in the 2000s, Modern Family continued to demonstrate that there are more than nuclear families in America. Becoming a future-ready church states, however, that too often churches have been myopic in their ministry programming and should be considering how to engage extended and non-traditional families. Carl, when I interviewed you for the book, you were wearing a black t-shirt emblazoned with the words family member in white letters.
Yeah.
Can you describe the makeup of Faith City Church and how your church defines that term, family member?
Yeah, I think we did talk about a term, well, a motto or a mantra that we go by, that church isn't like family, church is family. And that mantra has played a significant role in how Faith Cities make up with churches with single parents, families that have adopted children of different nationalities, families that are blended, families that are traditional, similar to mine, and families that are non-traditional. And we believe that makeup doesn't change how you interact, help, support, or develop one another within our church, because your family is different or your family structure may not be the same as someone else. And so we have really dived into what that means. I don't know if I could just take liberty real quick to talk about a single mom and a single dad who started to come to our church, who actually were friends before they came. And so when a single mom was looking for a church, she invited a single dad who has his 3 kids and she has her 1 kid. And we would see the interactions between her and the kids and him and the kids. And they often played the roles that needed to be played, as far as like if they were co-parenting together. But they were parenting together. They even involved our kids and started to take our kids out on their excursions. And so there was no barrier to how the family would operate and support one another. And it started to show us that we have a different sense of family, but also the same sense of family all at the same time, if that makes sense for people when they're thinking about having church, and how some families will continually look different when they walk through the doors, and not to be surprised by that difference.
What a great example. Thank you for sharing that. Was there a particular biblical conviction you had as you sought to reduce hunger in your community and serve the individuals and families who live there?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it's biblical, but I would say that I had to come to a perspective that data is black and white and people are in living color. I had to come to a different perspective when it came to feeding people. Because one of the things that we will, if we were to look at data, it wouldn't necessarily show that black families are struggling more with food than white families. It would show the data would show the numbers per se, but you would not be able to see that in living color. And so there's more than black and white families. Are people who identify as black and white, are people who don't identify. I think in the time and age that we have now, a lot of our people that come to our church will identify as other because they're multiracial, they come from different backgrounds, and they don't see themselves as just like binary black or white. And so the data when we first planted Faith City was specific around black or white. There was really like no other or non-Hispanic. There was really not that much differentiation around that families. And so when we started feeding people, we started seeing that we were feeding people who were indigenous, who were white, who were black, who were Latino, who were first generation immigrants. And we said, oh, this changes the whole scope of who we're reaching and what that means and who's coming for food and who we're delivering food to. I mean, one of the things that happened that was really shocking was when we started doing, like, we would do deliveries for free meals and we'll have everybody sign up for the groceries online and do Google's Doc. And so we noticed that there was an influx of people from Nepal coming into our neighborhood, but also they were also accessing the free food from the church because a lot of people don't know that immigrants don't get food stamps and they can't get food stamps until they become citizens, so they don't have access to those things. And so they rely on churches and nonprofit organizations to get food. And so that gave us a telltale of like who's here, how long they've been here, what is the process in which they're in, why they're here, and knowing that, hey, we are meeting the need for a family that's an immigrant that just arrived. And so that excited the church that we're not just feeding people who are just systemically hungry. We are feeding people who are actually hungry because they lack a resource. And so those began to build up and see something different about.
I see. I see. When my co-authors and I wrote about the shifts in congregations related to ministries to families, we stated that churches of the future will have permeable lines between the rhythms of congregational life and the rhythms of their surrounding community. Your grocery store is not in a separate building, but it is in the same 2,200 square footage where you hold worship. How did that happen, and how has that facilitated community life?
Yeah, so we planted our church in a recreation center, and then COVID hit, and we had to leave. March 15th, 2020 was the last day we had service in the recreation center. And then we moved in 2021. We started back up in-person services, and we were able to meet in a cultural center. And this is a funny story. I don't know if this is going to make sense to everyone. We were still operating the grocery store separately in a 1,000-foot square space. Things were people were coming in and growing. People were just sitting down and talking and communicating with us. And then it was like getting cramped. And I couldn't continually do that off hours. We were having discipleship and meeting in the grocery store. We were using that space more often. And then in 2020, when we knew that we weren't going to be able to meet, we just poured all our resources into buying food and sharing it with international students, families, and then actually we were helping people who were protesting. I mean, we were helping people who were getting tear gassed. There were families that were so displaced during that time that we just saw this little 800 square foot turned into this mission base that was helping families. Families were coming, other organizations were coming to get food and we were getting food dropped off in the back bay from other organizations to give out to folks. And so we saw, man, this is a lot happening with 800 square feet. There's a lot of stuff going on. And it was like constant movement. And people were just like wondering, like, what is going on here? Like, what is happening? I mean, we were definitely an emergency resource. Then a space opened up about 2 blocks away, actually, not really far, same neighborhood, same street. And we said, and we were meeting in the cultural center, and I remember we had a new family coming in, and they were allergic to cats. And so, funny thing, this space had cats. The owner of this space had cats to get rid of the mice in the space. And so we would have to, before Sunday service, we would have to round up all the cats, lock them in a room so that these families could come in and not have an allergic reaction to cats while they worship with their kids. And so it just became like, after a while, we started to ask everyone, are you guys, what about we sought a new space? And they were like, yes, no more cats. And then they started to think like, oh, will this be a space we'll get to use each day? Yeah. Will we have access to it more than Sunday? Yeah. It was like, oh, yeah, we need a new space. Like, it dawned on them that it always dawned on me, like, we're paying around $1,700 a month for 2 hours a week, which is a lot of money for any kind of space. And then I was paying out my own pocket another $1,200 a month using the space 6 to 7 days a week. And I presented that to them, and they were like, oh, we need to combine our budgets and say we can afford a bigger space. We can have a space where the church can meet on Sunday, have Bible studies, do all these events that we desire to do, and the grocery store can operate and continue to operate, and we could combine those budgets together. And that's kind of how the mindset came in, was like, oh, we need a space together. We need to stop having these two separate spaces. And it became a logical answer to an illogical problem. And so I think that's how we got there, Adele.
That leads me to my next question. Thank you for sharing that. I hope to circle back to some more specifics about the store, but I'd like to first ask you about that ministry space you have just described that is now used for worship, but it's also where the store is. You mentioned to me that your fellowship time that follows worship aims to assist parents, including single parents. And I'm wondering about how you describe that. You mentioned the two single mom, the single mom and the single dad and their kids. But I wonder if in general you can describe about that time right when worship ends, what you may try to do to help folks who are in all these various kinds of family situations.
Yeah, so we have kids church, and so there's a little bit of control chaos that moves into quietness that gives parents the time to cohabitate with other adults. Then the kids come back, and so the first thing we've done, when you come to Faith City, you'll always have food. So there'll be food in the space where families, kids, anybody that walks through the door will have a brunch type meal when they walk through the door. And they also get coffee, because I don't think, Adele, when we talked, I didn't have the coffee shop. So now we have the coffee shop, the grocery store, and the church. And so we make handcrafted espressos for when people walk in, so they could get a latte, a cappuccino, whatever they like, Americano. So they're walking in, getting that. Parents are asking and receiving that. And then their kids stay during worship. Now, we really had a big conversation around this, and the families like really fought and said, hey, we want our kids to be with us in the midst of worship. And I said, if your kids are going to be with you in worship, they got to learn something. They got to learn to play an instrument. They got to learn to go on beat. They got to learn to clap. They can't just be like drawing and running around and doing all this kind of crazy stuff. So we bought shakers, tambourines. And so our kids were already really involved. And so when we did that, we started to see that kids were really engaged in the worship experience when they became a part of it. So then that happens. So after worship, we release them into kids ministry. And after releasing the kids ministry, we have our service time. But also after our service time, we instituted this 20-minute fellowship. So it's mandatory fellowship after service, 20 minutes where we tell parents, hey, you're not allowed to pick up your kids. Your kids got another 20 minutes in service. And so they'll be in there with the children's person. And then during that time, you get to talk to adults. So go meet somebody, go have a conversation with somebody. And we did that one because we're parents and we understand like when we go to a church, as soon as church is over there, shuffling us off to kids ministry, we don't get to meet nobody, talk with nobody, see if we can have a relationship with anybody. And we went to a church, actually an immigrant church that did that. And we were like, oh man, why wouldn't we want to do this? Why wouldn't we want to have adult time? and so that's kind of where we started to see people connecting, and then fellowship would happen, and then people would stay at church longer. They would figure out how they would have dinner together. And then so this week we celebrated for the first time after I guess we would say 4 years, 5 years of church planting. We had 8 baptisms at our church on one Sunday. Usually it's like 1 to 2, but we had 8 baptisms this last Sunday, and so that was a beautiful experience. And it was youth, it was adults, it was mixed, it was different families, and it was other family members bringing their kids to come to church now. And so we just believe that whole moment of switching into allowing people to fellowship without their kids and being able to have that conversation outside of a Bible study or a small group created this like vacuum for them to be in relationship with new folks.
Thank you for sharing that great model that you picked up
Yeah.
from one church, and now maybe some others will pick up from yours. I want to circle back to the grocery store as promised. Some listeners may hear what you've said in this episode and think, my church isn't capable of taking on something like a grocery store.
Yeah.
But you told me that it was not a project solely involving church members. And so I wonder if you could talk just a bit about how it developed with the assistance of volunteers not previously connected to Faith City Church.
Yeah. So this is why Storehouse Grocers exists now, and it was just a vision of something. We've seen lots of churches do big outreaches where they would just give away food, and we would say that's really good. But then there's that problem around food insecurity, right? Here in Minnesota, there's a lot of lottery systems. There's a lot of people not being able to get food, but we know there's one thing that people can access, and that's food stamps and a small amount of cash. The problem is that food just costs so much, right? Food just costs so much. So like we said, what can we provide? Can we provide an affordable, accessible amount of food for people who are already going to go shop at a gas station or a convenience store, whether we believe they are or not, and be able to get the things that they need with a reasonable price? And that's how Storehouse Grocers opened up. And when we opened up, we said we could not do this without volunteers, because I can't hire 5 people. I can't even hire 5 people for my church. How am I going to hire 5 people for a grocery store? And so that's where we told people they could volunteer in shifts and come to the grocery store. We ended up staffing our grocery store for a full 8 hours, and also having a volunteer that became an assistant manager for me. And so that is really what happened in the midst of this. And her name was Lane, and I love Lane, and I still love Lane to this day. But she made something happen that she doesn't even know. She bought a house in the neighborhood, was remodeling it, came to me and said, "Hey, I want to actually volunteer. I used to be a manager at some bars and some restaurants, and here's what I can do." So Lane came in and really did inventory checks, worked late hours, closed, opened up, did all kind of things for free. Didn't ask me about money, didn't ask me like what could do. And when we started giving out free food during COVID, she was out in the streets holding up a sign. There's videos showing of Lane. So she really gave of her time and energy. And it's all because she believed in the mission. She wanted to be connected to the mission, and she didn't have a good relationship with the church. But that didn't mean that she didn't want a relationship with me. Her mom told her to go to church, but she had some really bad familiar relationships, and we were able to talk through some of those things and deal with some of those things as she was volunteering and working with me. and being able to bring some healing around some of those things. And so Lane ended up continuing to volunteer. She still stays connected to this day. We love her to death. And then after Lane came in, another lady came in named Riley. And Riley actually was a social media connector, content creator for nonprofits. And she came and ran the register. And then there's a few, like some elderly folks came in who were retired church workers. They came in and spent the time, but COVID happened, so they couldn't be in the space because of that. Then we had some friends from ministry come in who started volunteering, and we had a volunteer who was like a homeschool mom, and she would volunteer every week. She just gave like she volunteered with us for 5 years. She just was like, "Hey, I think I'm done." I said, "Okay, fine. That's okay. You can be done after 5 years of volunteering at the grocery store. You could be done." And so then, Adele, this is what happened. We got our workforce development program up and running. And so we've been running that for the past like year. And so we have actually been staffing young adults at the age of 25, been running the store and the coffee shop for the past 6 months, and being able to pay them a livable wage. And so it's been a beautiful on ramp. And then Storehouse is actually converting its business model into a worker-owned cooperative. And so as a pastor, I just was like, man, I don't want to own this forever. And so I want to empower people in my community to be owners. And so we put them through a workforce development program. So two of our participants are going to be new owners, and we're actually going to be planting a second church with a coffee shop and a grocery store in another neighborhood. And so we just feel like God's up to something in the midst of this, as Faith City Church is starting churches and grocery stores and coffee shops all together in one building.
Thank you so much for sharing that. In all of your discussion about your ministry in the store, you talked about wanting to do more than provide food when we talked before, but also restore dignity to neighborhood residents, even for the store's youngest customers. Could you give
Yeah.
a quick example or two of that before we close?
Yeah, I think one of the things we did talk about, and it's a story, I don't know if it made it in a book, is when during COVID and families were coming in for the very first time, figuring out that they can afford groceries. And I remember a family of four came in a small little space. So you hear every little conversation. And I remember the kids were looking at the shelf, and they didn't know, can I pick something up or not? And they looked at their mom, and their mom was like, yeah, pick up whatever you want. We'll get it. And it was because they were able to actually afford their child a choice, and other grocery options they weren't able to do that. And I think that vision of seeing kids walk into our store, be able to pick things up. I mean, we have that single mom I was telling you about. Her son loves cereal, so he gets a box of cereal every time. She's always paying for things. That single dad, we gave him groceries, free groceries for his family when they were in need. So it's an access point where people feel more than connected and know that they could get help right where we're at, and they tell other people. And so that doesn't mean that we're not stopping. And I think one of the things that we did really well during COVID was figure out who could be the liaison other than me to be able to help people get food, and that happened over and over and over again.
That was the story I was hoping you were going to share, so thank you. As we come to a close, is there any additional point you'd like to make, especially when it comes to how churches approach ministry to families as the society around us shifts in the varieties of family that show interest in church?
Yeah, I think families need to be connected to the mission, and no other mission is greater than the mission of God that connects to the needs within their community. And when they find a missional mandate that can be addressed, then you'll see so many more families stick, not just visit, not just be around, but they would just say, I want to be a part of something that continually grows and continually supports not just me, but my kids. And we know that that's what the missional thing of Faith City that continues to happen. And I mean, we got new members coming in, finding us on Google. They are bringing their whole family, not just their immediate family, but their extended family. And it's becoming a beautiful scene at our church, and we love it.
Thanks very much, Carl Johnson, for joining me in this episode of Becoming a Future Ready Church.